Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ninth session of Silicon Valley Startup Forum at KAIST. My name is Byung-Jae Jin, and I'm a professor at the KAIST College of Business. It's my pleasure and honor to be a moderator for today's session. The Silicon Valley Forum, hosted by KAIST College of Business, invites world-class scholars and experts from the startup community to gain more insights regarding the founding and growth of innovative startups. The forum has a total of 10 sessions, and today we are very much excited to host our ninth session. Our speaker today is Dr. Alex Osterwalder, who is one of the most influential innovation experts, leading authors and entrepreneurs in the world. Alex is known for simplifying strategic development processes and turning complex concepts into simple but intuitive models. He developed business model canvas, value proposition canvas, and business portfolio map, all of which are widely used by millions of business practitioners, entrepreneurs, and would-be entrepreneurs. Today, we invite him to learn some valuable tips and lessons about innovation leadership. And the topic of today's lecture is building invincible companies. So, without further ado, please join and welcome Alex Osterwalder. Alex, it's all yours now.
Thank you very much, and a real pleasure to be here. You can see I'm in Switzerland. I'm in the Swiss Alps here. It's a little bit cold, so without the jacket, you can already see this Swiss humor, not very good. So I'm going to talk about innovation and basically how to bring the startup world into existing companies. So I'm going to go through a couple of slides and help you understand, on the one hand side, how do startups actually go from idea to real business today? But in particular, how do you do that within an existing organization? And we call this very arrogantly building the invincible company. And I'll show you in a bit what that means. I do want you to take something to write, piece of paper, iPad, whatever, because I'm going to get you to participate in the chat window. So I'm going to give you little exercises in the next hour, so you don't just have to listen to me. So it is a little bit of a mini workshop as well, not just a talk shop where I talk. So now let's just frame it a little bit to ask ourselves, what is an invincible company? How do you become invincible? Well, there are three characteristics. And the first one is you actually have to believe you're not invincible. You have to believe as a company, even if you're at the top of your game, that you are vulnerable. So invincible companies constantly, all the time, reinvent themselves. And here's the key word, while they are successful. So innovation is not something you start, do, stop. You do it all the time, in particular when you are successful. And if we take Amazon as an example, why are they so successful? Because their founder, Jeff Bezos, says Amazon is going to die. And that's why they constantly reinvent themselves to try to live a little bit longer. The second characteristic is that really, really great companies, they don't just live from technology innovation, product innovation, and better prices. They compete on superior business models. So they go beyond product. They go beyond technology. Not that they don't, of course they do technology innovation, and that's important. But they build better business models around market opportunities, around technology innovation. Because innovation, technology innovation, typical research and development is not enough anymore. And the third one is probably the hardest. Invincible companies go beyond industry boundaries. They break out of the traditional industries. So some of you might remember from business education, Michael Porter's 5 forces and industry forces that shape you. Those of you who've done an MBA, maybe you learned about 5 forces. That is 1985. That's over. The best companies, they shape industries. They create industries. They break out of industries. So if you take Apple today, if you take many companies, and your country, it's actually pretty interesting because a lot of organizations have traditionally already gone beyond industry boundaries by building conglomerates. But I'll show you what the modern conglomerate looks like today, where everything together builds a real powerful business model. And you can think about that a little bit beyond the examples that I will mention. Now, what's interesting is that if you behave like this, you actually build a more resilient company, a company that is ready for big shocks in the system, for disruption. COVID-19, this pandemic, was a disruption, a shock to the system. So companies that act like this are more resilient, and they were also better prepared for a pandemic like this. Now, what is the challenge for established companies? So since we're in the Silicon Valley Forum, I have to bring some Silicon Valley people in. Vinod Khosla, established co-founder of Sun Microsystems, today an established venture capitalist. He says, all interesting things happen at the edges of the system. That means not in the big corporations, and if it happens in the big corporations, somewhere at the edge of the company, at the edge of the system. And that means it's very hard for established players to invent the future, to create the future. Let me give you a silly example, and I'll take an American car, but you know the car industry. Here's the challenge. Car companies see themselves as car companies. No surprise, right? That's the problem. I have the opportunity actually in January to speak to the top 100 managers of one of the top 3 car companies. I won't mention any names, one of the top 3. And they have this problem. They see themselves as car companies and they get disrupted by new insurgents. And we all know what Tesla did to the car companies. And you can love Tesla, you can hate Tesla. Well, what they did do is explode this electric vehicle market. And of course, they had the help of regulation, etc. But without Tesla, probably we would have never seen this explosion in electric vehicles. So if you look at Tesla, in particular car companies, what do they see? They see a new competitor and they say, it's a car company. Electric vehicles, still a car company. And that's not untrue. If you look at the sales of luxury vehicles, Tesla is at the very top, okay? One of the best-selling luxury vehicles. That's true. But it's actually not just a car company. So when they started out, they already started to build an infrastructure of fast charging stations. And that is very expensive. So Tesla built, if you want, around the world today, and they started out, of course, in North America, supercharger stations where you can charge your car. Why did they do that? Because they understood that one of the big fears of people who buy electric vehicles is that they would get stuck if they want to cross the country from the East Coast to the West Coast to the East Coast. So they took away that fear by building a different business model. One that doesn't just produce cars, but also builds the infrastructure. Okay, so is it a car company with infrastructure? Maybe not, because there's more. It's a software company. Software first, electric vehicles second. So today already, a big part of their income, no, a small part of their income, a big part of their business model is built around software. So already they are starting to charge for features that you can unlock in your car. So the cameras, the sensors are already in the car, but you have to pay to unlock them, and some of them come from subscription. That is a different business model. It's a subscription business model with recurring revenues, while the car companies are still selling cars. Of course, they're trying some stuff there. But the big thing also to ask is software first. What does that mean? Tesla today collects more data than any other car company. They have the best autonomous, vehicle systems because they have more data than everybody else, because they have more cars, more electric vehicles on the streets than everybody else. So it's a software first company. And I know some people, they say, well, I actually don't want a Tesla. I want to buy an electric vehicle, Porsche Cayenne. But they're waiting. Why? Because they have to go to a garage to make an update of the software. that is a different century. In a software-first company, you don't have to go anywhere because your software is going to update itself when it should. Now, still sounds like a car company, but it's not. Already today, Tesla is selling solar panels and battery packs so you can take the solar energy, put it into batteries, and put it into your car. So we can say, well, they're starting to be an energy company. That doesn't look like a car company. And of course, this is a very small part of the revenue today. But think of it. While Tesla is experimenting with selling solar panels and batteries, they're learning a ton while the car companies are just trying to figure out how to build electric vehicles and compete on electric vehicles. So you have two players competing against each other with completely different business models and different focus. And here's the thing. Startups today are better funded. There's more money for startups than innovation in companies today. Because, and I'm not talking research and development, the R&D, because that's technology. I'm talking about building a business. Startups have one goal: to build a scalable business. And they have more money to build scalable businesses than the innovation teams in all of the companies I know. Actually, there are a few exceptions, and I'll mention those today in the talk. So big companies, they always say, well, we can buy innovation, we can buy growth, and that's getting more and more expensive. So a lot of the really interesting players in the market, in the startup world, are getting more and more expensive, so it's harder and harder to acquire them. And many startup founders, they say, oh, you big company, I don't want to be part of your big company. I'm going to build the company that's going to kill you, disrupt you. So already you're seeing some startups like Discord, they get $10 billion offers by Microsoft, and they say, no, thank you. So that is really, really interesting. Now, okay, you'll say Tesla, good technology company, but what about manufacturing companies? Some of you might know Hilti. Hilti traditionally builds machine tools for builders, like drills, for construction, people on construction sites. They reinvented themselves by going from a business model where they manufacture and sell machine tools, like drills, towards a service business model where they don't sell the tools anymore, but they offer to construction companies a leasing service of the right tool at the right construction site at the right time. And all you pay as a construction company is a subscription fee, and Hilti manages the entire logistics of the tool fleet. So basically, they take away the headache from the construction companies, because construction companies don't want to manage a park of tools. That's not their core business. Their core business is to build, not to manage the tool fleet. So Hilti shifted from a selling business model to recurring services. So two examples to get us started, but there are three topics I want to address in the 50 minutes we still have before we go to Q&A. How do you compete on business models? How do I create better business models? How do I test my business ideas so I can decrease the risk? Because it sounds very risky to invent new things, but if you do it right, it's not. And that's the same for entrepreneurship and innovation. It's actually the same profession. And the third one, hardest probably, is how do I design an innovation culture? How do I become a lot more like Amazon or Tesla and constantly reinvent myself? Okay? So let's start with competing on business models. The challenge for established companies is that there are two worlds: managing the existing, managing the businesses you have. I call this exploit. And at the same time, managing the future. I call this explore. So there are three types of innovation. Some are closer to improving the existing. So typically, efficiency innovation, and I take this from Clay Christensen and his team. They had three types of innovation. Efficiency innovation is about improving what I have. Processes, existing business models, refining value propositions. And I would say a lot of companies are pretty good at this, And in your country, you're world class at this. Now, the second one, already a little bit more interesting, already a little bit harder to do, is sustaining innovation. When I come up with new value propositions, I replace the old ones, I create new channels, maybe digital channels, but it's still a very similar business model. It's already harder to do because I might launch new products and services and I don't know yet if they're going to work. But the very hardest is over here, transformative innovation. New business models in my company that will create my future. This is my future. Now, I like to say that if you're just managing the present, you're missing the future, right? So how do we invent the future? So these are three types of innovation. And let me give you three examples from Amazon so we can understand this a little bit more. So efficiency innovation would be robots or blockchain or automation for their existing warehouses in e-commerce. Okay, that is efficiency innovation. And you need to do that, but if that is all you do, you will more efficiently die with a dying business model. Now, since Amazon is pretty good at innovation, they already started with sustaining innovation. So they tried to bring, back in the day, with the Amazon Kindle, they tried to bring physical books to digital books. But basically, it was just bringing an old business model into the 21st century. But what's really fascinating with companies like Amazon is that they build completely new business models. So you probably have heard of Amazon Web Services. Think of it. An e-commerce retailer has built one of the most powerful cloud infrastructures on the planet selling to other companies. So why could they do this? Because they are open to innovation. And this business model, Amazon Web Services, has a strong synergy with their existing business model because they share the same infrastructure. So here's an exercise I like to do with the teams of big companies or established companies, with the management team or even the board of directors. And I ask them to take all of the innovations they've done, all of the interesting innovations. I say, think of the best innovations you've done at your company and write them down on a sticky note. So I ask them to do that. So I have all these important people writing on sticky notes, and that you can do in a physical room or on a whiteboard, a digital whiteboard. Then I ask them, take these interesting innovations that you have done in your company. It can't be ideas. It needs to be things you have done. And classify them in these three categories. Are they more efficiency innovation, sustaining innovation, or transformative innovation? And then I ask them, well, what about this one? Is that really sustaining? Isn't that just an efficiency innovation? What about this one? Tell me more about it. Is it like Amazon Web Services? And they say, well, you know, Alex, it's just an idea. Well, then it shouldn't be here because I was talking about results that you have. So at the end, the picture looks more like this. They come up with something that looks like this. And that's okay if that's what they want. So I asked them, is this the kind of innovation that you want? Only improve what you have. So again, it's important to improve what you have, but is it enough to survive for the next 5 or 10 years? And generally they say, oh, we were investing in all of these new technologies. We get innovation prizes. Everybody tells us it's great what we do. And that is okay, but they're not inventing the future. They're not building the revenue streams for the future. And remember the car companies I mentioned? That's exactly what they're doing. And when they're doing electric vehicles, they're probably here, while Tesla is already building something completely different. So they're behind. And the reason why they are behind is because they see themselves as a car company. So that is the key. So I just help leadership teams visualize where they are and what they are doing. Now, let's go into innovation and let's go look at, if I want to do this, if I want to do this over here, how do I need to act? What do I need to do? So basically, innovation is about going from idea, and the same for entrepreneurship, from idea to real business, okay? That's what I want to do. And it's a pretty messy process. It's a pretty messy process. But It is a process. So sometimes people think innovation is all about creativity and there's no process. It actually is a very strong process, and it has two main activities. The first one is the red one, business design, designing better business models, designing better value propositions. That is one part of the innovation or entrepreneurial journey. Same for a startup entrepreneur or an innovator in a company. The second bubble is the yellow one. It's all about very quickly testing your ideas and changing them, because ideas don't matter. What's important is to adapt the idea, test the idea and adapt it constantly. So let's stick to the red part first, because we're talking business models. You ideate, you come up with some ideas, you quickly sketch out the idea in what I call a business prototype. We'll see how to do that. I assess this business prototype. Is this a good business model, a bad one? And then I go and test. So let's stick to the red part. But once I have this idea sketched out, I need to ask, well, what needs to be true for this idea to work? So like a scientist, I make the hypothesis explicit. All of the things that need to be true for this idea to work. I then take the most important hypothesis and I test them with experiments. And when I learn from those experiments, shows me if my idea is going to work or if I need to change my idea. So as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, I go through this double loop again and again and again. Like an obsessed person, I go through this loop. I test things, I learn, I change my idea. So the idea doesn't matter. What matters is adapting the idea until it works. But now let's go into business design first, and I'm going to get you to do an exercise because I've been talking a lot. In business design, we need to figure out two things. The first one is the right business model. How do I create, deliver, and capture value? So that's where we created our first tool, the business model canvas, to help people sketch out the idea so you can adapt it, you can play with the idea. The second thing you need to get right, this is the second tool, is the value proposition canvas, which allows you to make explicit how you create value for the customer. So you need to get both right. How do I create value for the customer? How do I create value for my business? That's business basics, right? But that's the interesting part. We're going back to basics to reinvent ourselves. So let's stick to the business model first. So that was our first book, Business Model Generation. That's 10 years ago. And here we tell the story of how to create value for your organization. So quickly, you have a value proposition for your customers, two first building blocks. You ask, how do I create this value? Which resources and activities do I need? Which partners do I need? Resources are factories, intellectual property. Activities are the things I need to be good at, maybe research and development, maybe marketing, maybe building technology. And when I know that, I know the costs. I like to call this the backstage of your business model, the infrastructure, the plumbing. And then you have the front stage, which is about how do I reach my customers, which channels? Stores, internet, mobile phones, resellers, right? How do I create a relationship? Is it transactional, very short term? Or is it long term? I can lock in the customer. And then how do I capture value? Through which revenue streams? So very quickly, I can map out my business model idea. And important is the story, how I create a better business model. Now, let's move to a little exercise. And we're only going to look at parts of a business model. We're going to look at how to create better business models around a product. And we created this pattern library where you can get inspiration. And there are two types of business model patterns. When you start from an idea, you're inventing an idea here, and you're going to use a pattern to make this idea better, to make the business model of your idea better. Could be a technology idea, could be a market opportunity. So that is when you start from scratch, from a green field. Then we have the second type of business model pattern, when you shift an old business model to a new one. So remember at the beginning, I showed the example of Hilti. They moved from manufacturing and selling towards a service business model. That's a shift, okay? Let's start with invent patterns first. So the idea here is that you start from an idea, from a technology, from a product, from a market opportunity, but you make it better by coming up with a better business model. And we created an entire library around this, some that start with the front stage, customers, markets, channels, that's the yellow part. Front stage disruption, we call this. Then you have the blue part, where you disrupt the backstage, different resources, different ways to configure your activities. And then you have the green part, where you're going to change the way you earn money. So many, many different patterns, and all of them can act as an inspiration for you. So let's get started. And I'm going to just ask you a question and type into the chat window what you think these three business models have in common. The Xbox, the game console, Microsoft Windows, the operating system, and you might remember the iPod, the first really powerful digital music player that, remember maybe Steve Jobs saying you could put 1,000 songs in a pocket, because I love learning from old business models. What do these three business models have in common? So you can type into the chat window in YouTube and ask yourself, what not does the technology have in common, but the business model? Because what we're now going to do is focus not on products, we're going to focus on the business model. And what they all have in common is that they added switching costs to their business model. They make it difficult for their customers to leave them. That's what we call switching costs. They make it difficult for the customer to switch. And that means you lock in the customer and you can earn more money. It's a very trivial thing to think of, but most people who invent a new product or new technology, they don't ask, could we create switching costs? So let's do an exercise. Here is the business model pattern. You have a value proposition for a customer segment, and you try to lock in the customer with a switching cost that's in the value proposition. And because you do that, you increase the so-called customer lifetime value. You're going to earn more from them because they are locked in. You don't sell to them once, but again and again and again, because you lock them in. And the example I want you to work on, and I'm going to give you maybe 2 minutes, is the iPod. Because everybody, and I deliberately take an old example. You might remember, it's interesting, you can go to the internet and go watch, when Steve Jobs launched the iPod, this was a very revolutionary device. And it's used a lot as a business case study today in many, business schools. But the interesting thing is, he said, this little device holds 1,000 songs and it goes right into my pocket. Everybody saw a technology innovation, which it was. That's correct. Software and technology innovation. But what people don't realize is when Steve Jobs and Apple launched this, they actually had a business model strategy in mind. Because once people started to put 1,000 songs onto iTunes, into the iPod, they had their entire music library in this device. It became very difficult to switch the next time they would buy a new digital music player. Because you think, I have to copy my entire library to a new device, that's annoying. So they locked in the customers. So 2-minute exercise, I want you to do this. So you have to do it to learn. So you can't just lean back 2 minutes. And I'm going to give you some help so you can actually do the exercise easily and you don't need to think about everything. So I gave you the pattern, which was the pattern of switching costs, of gravity creators. And I'm going to give you the building blocks that I want you to put into the right box. On the left-hand side, you have the business model building blocks. And I want you to put the right sticky notes. So on the left-hand side, you have the letters. Here, I want you to ask, in which box does this first sticky note go? Does it go in 1, 2, 3, 4? So I want you to write down the right sequence of letter. Which letter goes with 1? Which letter goes with, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That will give you a sequence of letters. Once you have the entire sequence, you type it into the chat window, okay? So come up with the sequence of letters, which sticky notes go with which number, and I'll give you 2 minutes to do that. So please work, because I know you're going to have fun learning this, to map out just a little part of the business model of the iPod. I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I'm going to be quiet so you can focus on doing the exercise. And then after that, I'll give you the solution. Okay, so I hope everybody typed the solution into the chat window. So we had a little bit of background music to help you focus. Very good. So the solution was A, D, B, E, F, C. And I'll go through it, though. It's 1,000 songs in a pocket is the value proposition, targeted at the mass market. Of course, very straightforward. And when you get people to put music into the iPod, onto iTunes, you actually create switching costs. They're locked in. You make it difficult for them to switch. So a transactional relationship all of a sudden becomes a long-term relationship. And because of that, now they earn money from people coming back the second time they buy an iPod, the second time they buy a digital music player, they are likely to buy an iPod. So all of a sudden, without a subscription model, there was no subscription model, all of a sudden you have recurring transactional revenues from hardware. And Apple was always a hardware company, so they earned a lot of money from hardware because they made it hard for people to switch. Now, that is the first part. Then, of course, they had to build the software with the iTunes store and the iTunes software to get people also to buy music. And the thing I want you to know and to keep in mind, they never earned a lot of money from music because they had to pay royalties to the record companies. But that was not their goal. Their goal was to get people to put music onto the iPod so they would come back again and again and again. And all of that was based on a technology innovation. But here's the key. This business model looked like it was just a technology innovation, but it was actually a business model innovation. And I didn't give you the whole business model because the point here is only to look at one pattern, the pattern of the gravity creator that creates gravity to lock you in. I could map out all the rest, and that would be interesting, but I want you to understand just this interesting part that they put in place. So in the Invincible Company, our book on the building the Invincible Company, we show you how you can score every business model. So you can ask questions, but you can look at an idea or a real business model and you score how good is the business model. So in this case, I score if the customer is locked in or not. Is it hard for my customers to switch? Then I have a high score. Is it very easy for them to switch? They can switch tomorrow to a different device, for example, it's -3. And most companies actually perform pretty weakly on this. And that's just one question among the many, many different questions with the many different patterns. So what I wanted you to understand is how to design better business models. And I give you one little aspect, one example here. Now, that is for new ideas, like a new technology, like the iPod. But what established companies need to do is to shift from old business models to new one. That is really the competitive advantage today. It's the ability to shift all the time. Like Rita McGrath, a friend and colleague, likes to say. So that brings us to the shift patterns, where you start from a business model and you shift to a new one. So you take an old one, you shift to a new one. So the example I already told you is Hilti, where they said, well, we're going to shift from selling high quality tools, because that's not enough anymore, towards offering a tool fleet management service. And that was a substantial shift for the entire company. So Christoph Loss, who used to be the CEO of Hilti, said this really changed the business, because they went from transactional revenues to recurring revenues. That helped them actually survive and thrive. So this is a big part of their business. So you can see they had a crisis here, it went down, and they reinvented the business model and it went back up again. And it gave them a long-term competitive advantage. So what happened here is that they went from an old business model, selling products, they applied this idea of a pattern, the shift pattern, and they went to a new business model, which is the one of earning money from services around the tools. So tools are still at the center, but they don't sell them anymore. And that changes the entire business model. So just like for Invent Patterns, we created a library. Some start with a value proposition. Some start with the front stage. Some start with the backstage. And some start with the profit formula. But I want to talk about some other topics, so we're not going to go just into the patterns. The thing I want to leave you with is when we talk about shift patterns, it can go in several directions. So here we have one from low tech to high tech. Okay, you could go, that's a traditional one. You go from low tech to high tech digitization, for example. But you could also go from high tech back to low tech, and that can be a competitive advantage. So one of my favorite examples is the Nintendo Wii. So some of you, I'm sure you've played with the Nintendo Wii. When Nintendo launched the Wii, it was actually an inferior technological platform. The graphics were terrible. The computing power was terrible. But what they did is they changed the business model. So they competed on inferior technology and created more profits. Why? Because they served an underserved market of casual gamers with a cheap machine that the casual gamers loved because it was fun. So even with inferior technology, you can win. And I want you to keep this in mind. Innovation doesn't mean new technology. Innovation means creating value for customers with potentially new business models. Now, next topic is how do I test business models? This is crucial because I need to decrease the risk that my idea was not a smart idea. And my friend and serial entrepreneur, Steve Blank, who invented the whole lean startup movement with customer development, he likes to say that there's a fine line between vision and hallucination. So you have to make sure you're not hallucinating. And I talked to you about Tesla, but there's another example that many of you probably don't know, Better Place. And Better Place had a similar vision to Tesla, and they also wanted to build a infrastructure. So they said, what is the biggest problem with electric vehicles? Well, it's the charging. So what if instead of charging here and waiting for 30 or 40 minutes, what if I built a battery swapping infrastructure? I build the infrastructure so I can drive in, it swaps the battery, and I drive out 3 minutes later. It would be really fast. Wow, that's a great idea. And they had a very experienced CEO, Shai Agassi, who used to work for SAP, one of the biggest software companies in the world, and they raised money for this startup idea because it looked amazing on paper. And the vision was, of course, we're going to launch the most successful electric vehicle. Now, what happened was this. Nobody showed up. So this great vision, this great idea, this great business plan turned out to not work. And they lost $850 million in the process. It's like you put $850 million on a pile and you burn it because they built the infrastructure before testing the idea. So in innovation and entrepreneurship, we like to say you need to design an idea as if you were right, but then you don't make a business plan. You actually test as if you were wrong. You are very humble and you say, I am probably wrong. Let me make sure I'm right. So you ask what needs to be true for this idea to work. This is what we call hypothesis. You test your hypothesis with experiments and you learn from the experiments. And what you learn allows you then to decide, can I do more testing because I'm on the right path? Or do I need to completely change my idea or even kill it, So now what we need to admit when we're innovating is when we start from idea to business, I have no idea. Risk and uncertainty is at its maximum. So what is my job as an innovator or a startup entrepreneur? It's to decrease the risk. I need to decrease the risk. How do I do this? With small experiments. I can talk to customers and they will tell me that's a stupid idea. That's okay, because I can then change very quickly and I didn't lose a lot of money. Later on only do I do a technology prototype. So I still probably learn, this doesn't really work. But I only gradually increase the money I spend the more I learn. So I don't build something while I don't know. I only start to build stuff here when I already learned a lot about what doesn't work. So let's go back to Tesla. When Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, two of the co-founders, started the idea, they wanted to build an electric vehicle, the Roadster, and in 2008, they launched it. So it took quite some time, and that's when they brought on Elon Musk as one of the first early investors. Now, Mark Tarpenning has a great video online, and we'll send you the slides. He has a great video online where he shows how Tesla didn't just build the idea like Better Place, they actually tested it from the start. I'm going to show you a couple of experiments they did. The first experiment is one that you call boomerang. They took the existing competitors on the market, the electric vehicles that existed at the time in 2003, and they would talk to customers and ask, well, what do you like? What don't you like about these existing products? That's what you call the boomerang experiment. You take a competitor's product and you put it in front of your customers and you start to learn from it, what works and what doesn't for the customer. Now, of course, you can see, why would anybody buy this kind of vehicle? Now, the second experiment they did was a so-called mashup. Mashup means you take different pieces from existing solutions and you mash it up into one solution that gives the customer a little bit of an idea. In this case, they bought a Lotus Elise, so an existing sports car. They took everything out and they changed things to turn it into something that would at least look like an electric vehicle. Couldn't drive yet, but they could show the customer something more concrete. Now, this is what they put together, and it actually, looked pretty interesting, like a real car that could drive, and they learned a ton from it. So they didn't stop there. They went on to get customers to do something. So they built a so-called simple landing page. What does that mean? They put up a website, and the website over here, you can see, had a little window where you could put your email if you were interested. So they would say, are you interested in this kind of electric vehicle? Before it existed, before they could sell it. And they said, sign up here if you're interested. And what happened is they could learn how many people would sign up. If 1,000 people would come to the website and nobody would sign up, well, they would know probably there's not that much interest. So they didn't stop there. They said, well, okay, it's very easy to give an email. But what if we did a so-called pre-sale? What if we asked people to put real money on the table to prove that they were interested? So they went on and they put on the website here the possibility to reserve a signature 100 collector's edition Tesla Roadster. And you would have to pay $100,000 to reserve your car. Nobody puts down $100,000 if they're not interested, even if you have a lot of money, right? So they got real evidence from the fact of doing this experiment. So what I want you to take away from this is that there are very powerful ways to test your idea by building a sequence of experiments to increase the strength of your evidence. The evidence that you are onto a good idea, because ideas could be good, could be bad, you don't know. The only thing you can do to prove that it's not a stupid idea is actually to run experiments and collect evidence. And sometimes you will learn that nobody's interested, and you probably need to kill the idea, and that's okay. Now, brings us to the last topic. And I'm going to have one more little chat window exercise for you. I want you to understand how to design an innovation culture, how to work more like a startup entrepreneur. And if you are a startup entrepreneur, at one point when you have a successful business, you need to actually keep that entrepreneurial spirit alive in your company. And I actually realize I'm going to have a little technical challenge. So I'm going to have to do something here in a second to turn on the sound so you can actually hear a video I want to show you. So I'm going to get to that in a bit. But now, innovation doesn't happen in companies if the leadership doesn't put in place the right culture. And that is very hard to do. But if you don't, your innovation culture is always going to get killed by this here, the managing of the existing. So if you're an established company, you're building stuff, you're always going to focus on making what you have better. But that is probably going to kill any new idea that looks a little bit different. So you might get world-class, remember, efficiency, innovation, but it's going to be very hard for you to do anything that is fit for the future. So what we need is not one culture, we need two cultures. One culture is about managing the existing, that's what we call exploit on the right-hand side, and the other culture is inventing the future. And both are right, but they're different. Here, you manage the existing, here you invent the future. And Steve Blank, who we've seen before, he likes to say, here you pay the salaries, here you pay the pension, the future. So the focus is different, which also means that, why is the focus different? Because uncertainty is different. On the right-hand side, I'm managing a business. I know the customers. I know the value proposition. I know the channels. So the uncertainty is relatively low. I can predict a lot of stuff. On the left-hand side, new customers, new value proposition, maybe new technology. It's very unpredictable, so I need to work differently. If I'm looking at the financial philosophy, on the right-hand side, I can make a plan. It's a safe bet. I can pay dividends. On the left-hand side, it's more like venture capital. It's more like Silicon Valley. I invest in 10 ideas, but only one is going to work. That means that 9 ideas are going to fail. And in many countries, in many companies, failure is not a good thing. People fear failure. But in innovation, if you're not failing, you're not going fast enough. You're not innovating. So you need to invest in a different way. And then we get to culture. Over here, we have a planning culture. Over here, we have an experimentation culture. They're very different. And when it comes to people and skills, very different. Here we have managers, and here we have explorers. These are different people and different skills. Both are hard, but they are different hard. They are both hard, but they are different hard. So that's what we're going to look at now in a case study. And I'm going to show you a quick video, but you're going to have to give me just 10 seconds to do a technical manipulation. So a little bit unelegantly, I'm actually going to have to here hide my slides for a second, because I have to just turn on the sound, actually change the channel on my sound. So you see I have a very difficult technical setup with 3 computers, 10 screens, and now I have to just quickly get this sound to work so I can show you. Seems like I made it happen over here. Let's see if it works. You do thumbs up if the sound works. I'm going to show you the example of Bosch, a big German engineering company for over 400,000 people. This gentleman here, Dr. Uwe Kirschner, he put in place the Bosch Accelerator program to build new businesses. And what's going to be interesting, he's going to ask a question that I would like you to answer in the chat window, and then I'm going to show you how they built this accelerator. So thumbs up if you can hear the sound.
Hi there.
Now.
My name is Uwe Kirschner. I'm from Bosch Management Consulting. I'm partner for
Good.
Business Model Innovation, and it's a pleasure to be the Invincible Company of the Month. What you see here is Bosch's research center in Stuttgart. It represents Bosch's history, present, and certainly also the future. Traditionally, our organization has been very successful in the development of new technologies and new products. And certainly, this will also remain so in the future. In the year 2015, something very important happened. Our board of management decided to set up a competence center for business model innovation. The challenge was clear. We had to test many innovation ideas in a fast and capital efficient way. We wanted to find the very few innovation projects which have the potential to scale. Now the question to you, in order to reach that number of 19 innovation projects successfully exiting our Bosch Accelerator program, how many projects entered the validation phase? 19 innovation projects, 43, 108, 214, or even 926. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so Uwe asked here, how many ideas did they need to invest in? What do you think to create 19 winners? Was it 19, 43, 108, 214, or 926? To get 19 winners, how many ideas did they need to invest in? How many projects? Think of it. It's a German, very conservative company. And you would think, well, these are smart people, right? They're experienced engineers. They should probably get into 19 projects to get 19 winners. And that could work if we talked about efficiency innovation. But the problem is, anytime you go a little bit more towards uncertainty, you don't know what's going to work. So many ideas won't work. And that's okay, because you're going to kill those ideas and only invest in the ideas that produce evidence. So let's listen to Uwe explain what the solution is, but more importantly, how they have done this, okay? How did they do this to get to this positive kind of outcome, which is quite astonishing?
Yes, you're right. 214 innovation projects entered our validation engine, our Bosch Accelerator program. You've probably read the book, right? Let me give you some additional information around these 214 innovation projects which entered our Bosch Accelerator program. Phase 1 has an average duration of 3 months, including prep time. The average budget is 120,000 euros per team, and this already includes the personnel costs. After a very short period of time, and as I said, 3 months, we are able to successfully terminate 65% of all innovation projects. The remaining projects, in numbers 74, continued their journey in phase 2 of our program. The average team has a budget of 300,000 euros. And again, this includes, on one hand side, the personnel costs, but also the costs for the development and iteration of the MVP. And again, at the end of phase 2, a high number of innovation projects can be successfully terminated. We believe it's very important to ask the teams themselves whether they believe they're a go or no-go at the end of phase 1 and also at the end of phase 2 of the program, because this really brings responsibility to teams, and this also certainly drives cultural change in an organization. The go criteria, which we derive out of most recent methods and tools, are the foundation for a proper decision whether a team should stop or continue their journey. The success rate of the Bosch Accelerator program is around 10%, meaning that only 10% of the innovation projects are successfully exiting our Bosch Accelerator program. Now, you might argue that's a low number. I would disagree, because in explorative and adjacent innovations, you need to accept that the success rate is reasonably low. The purpose of the Bosch Accelerator program is to find those very few innovation projects which really have the potential to scale. Successful organizations, we do both. They run a portfolio of their existing core business and also a portfolio of their new business. Many innovation projects won't be successful, but a couple of innovation projects, if you have this proper validation process, should become part of your future core business. And who knows, maybe one or the other innovation project might be even invincible.
Okay, so you can see, and this is always very, very provocative for many people to understand, we went from 214 teams here. We gave them the opportunity to experiment with a relatively small budget, 120,000 euros. And here's what's important. After 3 months, they killed, and Uwe says successfully terminated, 65% of the projects, because it's okay. Nobody failed technically. It's just, oh, there was nothing there. People were too early. Customers were not interested. That's okay. Then they went to 74 teams. So this is over 3 years. Again, they give them a little bit more money to experiment. Again, they kill a lot of the ideas, and they only in quotes, bring 19% really to the market. And that's a perfect ratio. That's okay. Because in the startup world, it's exactly the same thing. Not every idea is a winner. And that's how it works in the real world. Now, let me just give you one more indicator before I'm going to wrap up to show you what an established company needs to put in place for this kind of thing to happen. And one of my favorite examples is Ping An, a company that started out as a insurance and banking conglomerate, traditional insurance and banking in China, but they were able to become a technology company because they did one important thing. They gave innovation power. So here's what they did. They said, we are going to create a structure where you have a CEO who manages the existing, and that was the founder, Peter Ma, who's also chairman, and at the same level of power, we're going to create a chief entrepreneur who has only one task: to invent the future. It's not the chief technology officer, it's the so-called chief entrepreneur who builds new businesses. And over time, they came up with a slightly different structure. So Peter Ma became chairman, or stayed chairman and moved away from CEO. And they put in place a structure with 3 co-CEOs: Jessica, responsible for the future; Yongling Xi, responsible for managing the existing; and Jason Yao, kind of building the bridges. When you give innovation power, it will succeed. Now, because we work with a lot of, my company and I, Strategyzer and I, we work with a lot of large companies, we understand what needs to happen to make innovation really work. There are 3 things: leadership support, organizational design, and innovation practices. And we have this scorecard, so you can download this on the internet. It's called Innovation Culture Readiness. But I'm going to simplify this for you, so you don't have to go through this entire scorecard. You just have to ask 3 questions. 3 questions. The first one is, how much time does your CEO spend on innovation? And if it's not 20 to 40% of their time, if the CEO doesn't spend 20 to 40% of their time on innovation, innovation will not happen in your company, period. Second one, so the CEO is there to help create the environment, but the CEO doesn't pick the ideas, doesn't work on the ideas. You need a full-time job at the very top of your organizational design in the org chart, somebody who reports to the CEO who has only one job: to invent the future. And that is not the chief technology officer, because generally the chief technology officer is there to manage technology to improve the existing. So it's not about technology, it's about building businesses. And the last one is, how good are you at killing ideas? If in your company you don't kill 9 out of 10 ideas, you're probably forcing your people to play it safe. Because if they have to succeed, if they can't fail, if it's not possible in your company to fail without taking a career risk, it means that everybody's going to play it safe. So what you actually want in innovation is a very high failure rate. But you're going to do it in a way that you have a process to manage that failure. In execution, you manage a supply chain, you manage factories. Failure is not an option. In innovation, it's an inevitable side consequence. It's never the goal, but it's an inevitable side consequence. So I did 2 minutes overtime, I think, so very bad for a Swiss, 2 minutes overtime. But I think you learned a little bit of something about the Invincible Company in the 60 minutes that we had together around content. So I'll keep it there, and I think we have some time, quite a bit of time for questions, right?
Okay, Alex, thank you for your very insightful presentation. Actually, I myself also learned a lot from your presentation. I've been teaching entrepreneurship for more than a decade. I've been always kind of asked by students how to use entrepreneurial tools for large organizations or well-established organizations. Now you gave us a lot of answers to those questions. Thank you for that. I really agree that especially designing an innovation culture is really important, and it is really hard to implement that. So can you give us a little examples or your own personal experiences, how you could successfully design an innovation culture for large organizations?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to show a video of a person who created an innovation culture, but first made a big mistake. And the example I'm going to use is Hubert Joly, who became the CEO of a retailer called Best Buy. So some of you might have heard of Best Buy. Best Buy is an American retailer that sells technology stuff, right? And everybody thought Best Buy is going to die. So they hired a turnaround CEO. And what do turnaround CEOs normally do? They fire a lot of people, they restructure. And Hubert always said, people are not part of the problem, they're part of the solution. And he turned around the company and turned it into a powerhouse by doing a couple of very astonishing things, like not competing only against Amazon, but working with Amazon, working with a competitor to actually turn that into a strength. So how did he do this? He first made a big mistake when he thought about innovation. So first they had to actually fix the core. And then when they built an innovation culture, he made a big mistake and he learned from that. And since we had Hubert on a webinar with us, I can show you a little video that we recorded with Hubert about what was the big thing that he learned. So you already see, I somehow magically was able to show the slide right away. So I'm going to show you the video of Hubert and how he turned around the company. The first mistake he actually made is thinking that he would get innovation if he put the people who are running the business in charge of innovation. But that is the number one mistake, because when you're running a company, you're fully occupied just managing the business. That's your number one task. So innovation is hard and it's a different profession. So let's quickly listen to Hubert, and then I might tell a couple of other stories of what we had to do to help some companies become innovation machines. So let's listen to Hubert about the mistake he made.
One of the mistakes I made for a while was I was expecting that the organization that's in charge of running the business would be able to innovate. And here's the scoop. If you're running a $50 billion company, 100,000 people, there's a promotion every month. There's no capacity. So a breakthrough moment was when we established the Strategic Growth Office. About 50 people, led by Corey Barry, who later on became my successor. So really staffed with top-notch people. 100% dedicated to identifying which opportunities, prototyping, piloting, testing, and then looking at scaling.
So what's interesting here is, first, he put his team running the business in charge, and he realized that's not going to work. So then he deliberately created a position focused on creating the future. And Corey Barry actually today is the CEO of Best Buy. So Hubert Joly retired and she became CEO. So it's an interesting sign, because traditionally it's mainly the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer who become the next CEO. But now here's the thing. The world is changing and managing a business is not enough. So we'll see more and more that we're going to have very, very talented people who are chief entrepreneurs who will become the CEO, because what's hard in business today is not just running the business. That's hard. But what's even harder is inventing the future. So what you really need is to put in place a structure where you give innovation power. So the kind of things that we do first when we try to put in place or help a company put in place an innovation culture is make very clear that if innovation has no power, it's not going to succeed, because there's no company on the planet that doesn't do innovation, but most of it is, let me be provocative, innovation theater. It's for the show. It doesn't create real results. It's theater. What we need to move towards now, and many companies are not happy with innovation theater anymore, is they're asking, what do I need to change? So to create a real innovation culture, I absolutely need to give innovation power. Now, what goes with that is that the CEO, himself or herself, they spend time on innovation. So there's a main drawing I do, and let me switch to my little drawing here. When I talk to senior leadership teams, or boards, because the boards are even, the harder ones to convince because they're very conservative. I say, look, we've seen that before. There are two sides of the business. One is exploit, and the other one is explore. So I draw this in a meeting room, or like here, I sketch it out, and I say, these are two different worlds. And you need both cultures in your organization. And as a CEO, your job is to spend at least 20 to 40% of your time on innovation, if you don't have a model as radical as Ping An, as we've seen. Why is that so important? Because number one, it's symbolic. Because if the CEO says innovation is important, but they don't spend time on innovation, the message and the acts are disconnected. So when the CEO does not spend time on innovation, nobody's going to take it seriously. They're going to say, well, the boss doesn't do it. Why should I? My career is important. I want to do something that can maybe get me to the top one day. So CEOs need to spend time on innovation. But the question, of course, then is, what is their job? It's not to pick ideas. It's not to say, oh, that is the future. Their job is to create the ecosystem that allows innovation to flourish besides the execution ecosystem. And this needs to be two cultures that live in harmony, in peace, because that's what the CEO can do. Create the ecosystem with the right key performance indicators here, which are different from the key performance indicators over here. Only the CEO and the senior leadership team can build this ecosystem for innovation to thrive. So number one, take the time and communicate how important innovation is, and constantly create a bridge between execution and innovation. So that is the key role that they need to start to do. So what goes with that often is actually creating the org chart, so creating something more like this, where you don't do the traditional reorganization, but you give innovation power. And also, the education we often do with leaders is, because there are different types of innovation, well, over here, efficiency innovation can actually work really well. Efficiency innovation, oops, now I can't do my drawing anymore. Let me see. Over here, efficiency innovation will survive and can thrive. But efficiency innovation is generally not enough to bring a company in the future. So only the senior leadership team can start doing this. That's the number one. If there's only one thing you're going to do to create culture, it's give innovation power. It's as simple as that. But then the second thing is to put in place different programs that work together and that are also able to draw on over here the powerful things that a company has. So if we take Uwe and Bosch and the example that we looked at, so let me show you, because this actually probably one of the best ways to illustrate. These teams here, if they are just teams that are somewhere in a separate building and don't have access to existing customers, they don't have access to intellectual property, they don't have access to the Bosch brand, then they're just startups in chains. So we need to build an infrastructure that supports these teams so they are stronger than startups. Today, startups are better funded than corporate innovators. So what do corporate innovators have? They have actually often less money, but they have brilliant people, they have experience, they have access to marketing, they have access to a brand, but that's only theoretical in many cases. So that's the second thing you need to do when you create an innovation ecosystem, is create the infrastructure for these teams. And then the third one is to create really a way, here we have these phases, to make evidence-based investments. So it's a shift from picking ideas based on what I like towards picking ideas based on the strongest evidence. And sometimes that means that senior leaders have to say, I don't like that idea. I don't believe in it, but the evidence is really strong. And, you know, we know that senior leaders are not always that humble to actually, you know, don't believe their own idea. But in innovation, the biggest job title and most experience is sometimes a problem when it's execution experience. So it's completely different job to innovate. And innovators, they are very good, and entrepreneurs, they're very good with ambiguity and seeing patterns in the evidence. It's a different skill set. So as a senior leadership team who wants to build an innovation culture, you also need to hire the right type of people, the right type of experience to let that culture flourish.
Okay, thank you for the answers. And I have one more question about the designing adequate KPIs. So sometimes it's better to create an independent organization for explorative type innovation, and sometimes you hire different people, and then we have to design different KPIs. How would the KPIs for explorative type innovation be different from KPIs for exploitative types innovation?
So actually, the KPIs are similar in the sense that as soon as you explore, you actually start to measure evidence. And if you're exploring a business model, or if you're exploring a product innovation, you're still measuring evidence, right? So the big picture is the same. And I actually have a little exercise it's good that you're asking, because I can show some content that I would have liked to show, but within an hour I can't show. So if we go and have a look at this. So how did they actually judge how to go from one to the other? So what was the KPI to know if I'm going to invest in a team or not? So we created something, you can also Google it to find it. It's what we call the Innovation Project Scorecard. And you don't score the idea per se, you score the evidence. So the KPI is how much evidence is the team producing, okay? So let's look at this. When we start with an idea, you have just a great idea on paper. It's an unproven idea. You have no evidence. But the first evidence you have might be on what people say. You go and interview people and they tell you, oh, I love this product. But what people say and people do is usually not the same thing. But at least you're starting to measure evidence. So you're looking at first evidence. People say, opinions, low investments mean maybe they gave an email address or so, they signed up to something. Remember the Tesla example. Now, stronger evidence is over here. They did something. It's a real fact. So remember, with Tesla, they did something. They paid $100,000 to get access to the car once it would be launched. That is strong evidence. So what you're measuring is the evidence, not the idea. So we came up with a score level so you can get a lot more objective in scoring the evidence that a team brings to the table. So an innovation team shows up and presents their idea to the so-called growth board. You know, in the startup world, that would be venture capitalists. If you have no evidence, you have a PowerPoint, you have beautiful slides, you have this traditional curve and say, oh, revenues are going to be $1 billion in 5 years. Great. Looks great. But then I say, well, you've heard a better place. They burned $850 million. There were no revenues, or very little at the end. So what I want to see is real evidence. So let's start with a scale. Level 1 is when you show me things that, let me just take the mess away here. So first evidence, light evidence from what people say. You went to go talk to 100 people and 20 people said, I have this problem every day. That's first light evidence. So they're telling you they have the problem. Great. Now, many teams would say strongly validated, but that's just what the potential customer tells you. So maybe they didn't understand the idea. So level 2 evidence is when you've showed them, remember the mashup with Tesla? They actually, they bought a Lotus Elise, they turned it into something that customers could see. That is light evidence with a real artifact. Potential customers still say if they like it or not, but they can see it. And when it's something real that you can see, you understand better. So that's stronger evidence because now they can react to the mashup, to the prototype. But it's still what people say. So then we move, here's a nice kind of line. We move away from what people just said towards what people do. So if I tell you, oh, I love this electric vehicle, I would buy it. Would is always a dangerous word. When people say would, well, maybe not. So what did Tesla do? You might remember here, they created a landing page and they asked people to sign up with their email. That is very light evidence because it's easy to give your email, but you won't give your email if you're not interested at all, right? So it's something they did. But now what Tesla went a little bit further, they have strong call to action evidence because people put here $100,000 on the table. But it's still a small group of people and it's early adopters. So it doesn't fully represent the real market. So the last level is when you get to complete real market evidence. For example, you simulated a sales. If you put up a pop-up store where you started to sell as if it was normal and you have normal customers coming in, that's level 5 evidence. So basically, you're measuring over the course of an idea, how much evidence does the team bring to the table? That's what you're measuring. You're not measuring, do I like this idea or not as a manager? You're measuring the evidence. And you kill ideas when there's no evidence. So it's very, very important because that is a very simple scoring system to measure the reduction of risk and uncertainty, right? To measure the reduction. So basically, as a team, but also as a investor, if you're outside, it's venture capitalist. If you're inside a company, it's a so-called growth board, you're judging the evidence, not the idea per se, the evidence that supports the idea. Of course, you also need to look at the idea. Does it fit our strategy? Of course, you look at those things. And that's where you can really start to kind of put things together. So let's do a 2-minute exercise. Is that okay? Get people to type into the chat window, okay? Because I'm talking a lot, right? So maybe it's interesting. So I explained the levels of evidence, and I'm going to give you pieces of evidence, and I want you to put them into the right number, right? So got 2 minutes, and you got all these pieces of evidence. A interview, you've got here a interview with a prototype. A deposit paid means they paid something to get the real product afterwards. You have Google ads with sign up button. You have desk research means somebody's been searching on the internet, getting reports. Signed letter of intent. A letter of intent is if somebody, in particular in business to business, this works well. If somebody signs a document to officially say, I'm interested in working with you as a company, and if you launch the product, I will buy it. It's not legally binding, but there's a signature, right? People don't like putting signatures under their things. And then sales from a pop-up store, that's more in business to consumer. You put up a store for 3 months, and you see if stuff is selling. So 2 minutes to put the right letter into the right number. So just put letters and numbers together. Which number goes with A? Which number goes with B, C, D, E, F, G? So, and I think we have music also during the exercise. Okay, so I hope a couple of you participated, typed into the chat window. So the solution is A1, B2, C4, D3, E1, F4, G5. So a structured interview, which often teams say, oh, we know this idea is going to work because people told us it's going to work. It's a great start, but it's level 1 evidence. If you have a prototype that you showed them, you know, like we've seen with the mashup with the Tesla, it's level 2. If they actually made a down payment, they paid in advance, Tesla did that again with the Model 3, that is level 4 evidence. If you got them to do something that, you know, it goes beyond saying, that's level 3, like the Google ads is very good. Here we were talking about Facebook ads. And if you do desk research, you know, a lot of big companies, they hire consultants to do a lot of research for them. That is worth very little. That's level 1. Imagine if an entrepreneur told their venture capitalist, yeah, can you give me $1 million so I can hire McKinsey to do some research for me? They would never see the venture capitalist again, right? So this is a real job where you actually need to change and adapt. You can't outsource. This is a big problem. Large companies think they can outsource the testing. You cannot. This is the job of people inside or a startup you invest in. And then the signed letter of intent, people signing is actually a pretty strong commitment. So I put that in level 4. And then we have the last one here. I'd put pop-up stores over on the right-hand side. So that is actually the kind of thing that Bosch did to judge if an idea goes to stage 2. They looked at the evidence. And of course, in the first 3 months, you won't have evidence for everything. You will only have evidence, only in quotes, only have evidence for customers. Do customers care? And that's okay. But if you can prove that customers care, you get evidence to go into the second phase. And then maybe at one point you start building a technical prototype, and that's why you need more money. And that's how you decide if an idea goes to the next stage. But what's also very important is to make it safe to fail, because a lot of teams will not find the evidence, and that's okay. So, you know that Jeff Bezos likes to say at Amazon, he actually likes to say that they are the best place in the world to fail. And what he means with that is that there's no space for operational failure. If you screw up when there's a warehouse that doesn't work, you're fired. But experimentation, you have to experiment. And it's very likely that things are not going to work because you're inventing, you're innovating, you're changing things. So you need to create a culture besides the world-class execution culture. Let me always emphasize that. You don't need to change everything. You need to add a culture. The culture you have, and I think in particular in your country, you have an amazing culture of execution. I've been there, I've worked with companies there. Really, really good, world-class execution. But I'd say failure is not something everybody's comfortable with, right? You risk your career, but you won't get the type of innovation that's required today to survive if you don't embrace failure. Failure is not the goal, of course not, but it's an inevitable side consequence. So efficiency innovation, new features of a product, that you're going to get. That is not so hard. But what is really hard is to build new business models. Think Tesla, solar panels. That is what car companies are not able to do. But if you're not able to do that, you're not building an invincible company. And it is possible that your company might disappear in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Now I have to move on to our last phase. I actually received a lot of questions from students, but given our time, I don't think I can ask all the questions, but I'm gonna select some questions. So here's some questions from our students. The many MBA students are here today to learn something from you. And would you be willing to share your own experiences with them regarding how they can improve their creativity and become innovation leaders in their organizations?
So, first thing I would say is creativity is not the problem. You don't need to actually, people who are extremely creative are usually the worst entrepreneurs, the worst innovators. Because there's in the beginning phase where you need to be creative and come up with ideas, but ideas are everywhere. So you just need to look around you in your daily life. In your daily life, everything that doesn't work is an opportunity. In your private life, wake up in the morning, look at the food and look at, everything that doesn't work is an opportunity. In your business life, with the customers you're working with, everything that doesn't work, that for them doesn't work, is an opportunity. Right? So that's all you need to do is open your eyes, beginner's mindset. Okay. But the hard part to really be good at innovation is not creativity. The hardest part is the process of turning an idea into a real value proposition that customers care about and a business model that can scale. That is hard. And that, it does require some kind of entrepreneurial talent, but it has less to do with creativity, more to do with process. So, Steve Blank likes to say, he's built 8 companies. He's launched this whole movement. He likes to say, entrepreneurship is an art and a science. And yes, there is the creative part. You need to kind of combine things in a new way. But there's also the science, the process part. So I think you need to play with both. And I think the problem today is that people actually overvalue the creativity part and they undervalue the process part. So the challenge is not to find a great idea. So you don't need to brainstorm for years to come up with great ideas. Ideas are everywhere. If the world was perfect, there would be no more ideas for innovation and entrepreneurship. The world turns out not to be perfect. There are really concrete challenges, but we also have global challenges like climate change. Turns out that's a pretty big opportunity. It's something we need to solve if we want to survive as a species, but it's also a business opportunity. So what I recommend to people who want to go more into innovation and get world-class at it, you need to think of yourself like an innovation surgeon. And you're going to medical school. You're going to innovation medical school. So you need to learn the theory, which is about business models. Look at business model patterns. So that will give you some creativity. Oh, could I copy what I've seen today with the iPod and switching costs? Yes, there's some creativity there to take models from different industries and bring them into yours. That part is the artistic part. And that's why we created the pattern library. So act number 1, go and buy Invincible Company. So a little bit of advertising there. But that helps, of course. But then that's like in medical sciences, in medical school, you learn the theory. You spend years to learn the anatomy of the body. You need to learn the anatomy of business. Go back to the basics. What is a great value proposition? What is a great business model? You learn that. But then there is, like in medical school, there's the internship, right? In medical school, you don't just read books. Imagine if your doctor came in and he said, oh, look, I read 500 books. Let me do this heart procedure on you. You get scared, right? So what you do, after the technical part of medical school, you do internships. So first you snip it around on dead people, and now there's computer-aided simulation. But you learn how to do it in the real world by actually working in a hospital, by following, world-class doctors and surgeons. So in business, it's very similar. The best way is actually to practice and to do. But if you do it yourself at the beginning, you're going to be crappy. You're going to be really bad. And that's normal. The first time you try to do entrepreneurship, turns out, the 18-year-old billionaire on the cover of Fortune magazine, that's a myth. That doesn't really exist. There's maybe 1 out of a billion people or 1 out of 100 million. That's very rare. So what you need to do is practice. And the best way, rather than doing it yourself, is what if you worked for a startup? What if you say, oh, well, I have a full-time job in this corporation. Well, guess what? What if you spent the evenings helping them? So you see from close up, you work with them. And they might actually say, well, you big corporate person, I don't need you because you don't have the skills I need. And they say, well, look, I can do this. And then you got to convince them. So you're part of learning of what they do wrong and what they do right. So you don't have to do it yourself. You just need to watch. If you watch, 100 startups, you will learn what they do right and what they do wrong. So that is the internship part. So again, a long answer to say, don't overvalue creativity. There's something there. Yes, you can do design thinking. Just learn the fundamentals of what is a great business model. How can I come up with better business models? And then go and practice as much as you can. You can do this in your business. You can do it as a startup. That's usually very hard and you make all the mistakes. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been, making mistakes for 10 years. Actually, the biggest skill of an entrepreneur is to look stupid 1,000 times until you figure it out and you look smart. But you don't look smart from day one. That's a myth. You actually experiment a lot, do things people say, that's not going to work. And what are you working on? That's useless. And of course, many things that you do are wrong. But what you will eventually start to see is what is right. So you need to look stupid to look smart. So rather than practicing creativity, I will give you a good advice. Practice looking stupid and confidently look stupid. Because as an entrepreneur, everybody will tell you, that's a stupid idea, that's too hard, that's never going to work. And you confidently need to figure out, well, maybe there's something right there. What did they say that I need to hear? What did they say that I need to prove wrong? So again, it's adapting the idea based on the evidence that you gain. And you'll look stupid 1,000 times. You'll make a lot of mistakes. The challenge is, how can you make those mistakes cheaply and quickly learn from them to adapt your ideas? So I get excited about this because I think there's this myth of the creative genius. Entrepreneurship, yes, there's a part of the creative genius, right, of the artistic, but that's not the hardest part. That you learn over time. Pattern recognition, you learn over time. The hardest part is to constantly experiment and look not so smart until you look smart. And I get passionate about this answer because it's a profession. Innovation and entrepreneurship is a different profession than managing. They're both hard, but they're different hard.
Thank you. Thank you for the great and insightful answer. I think the entrepreneurship is not merely about generating a great idea, but how to translate the idea into kind of real business model.
And you were talking about personal experience. I have 10 ideas a day that are good. But you know what? It turns out most of them are not so good, or they're very hard to turn into a real business. So what you just said is key. People overvalue the idea. Of course, if you have a great idea, it's a great starting point, but that's all it is. It's 1% of the work. And then the rest is not execution. The rest is actually adaptation until you execute, because execution comes a lot later. In between idea and something that could work that you execute, you need to constantly adapt. This is what we call the search for the right value proposition and business model. And since you were saying, personal experience, so I actually went into the more general part. I have a company called Strategyzer. It exists for 10 years, and we work with the biggest companies around the planet, biggest pharma companies, biggest banks. Actually, 5 of the top 10 pharma companies are our clients. But, as an entrepreneur, we existed for 10 years, but I would say for 8 years, we were in the ideas business and we were really good at it. But we never stopped and took one idea to scale it, to really grow in one direction and, really become a scalable entrepreneur. We started that 2 years ago, and I had to personally, as an entrepreneur, understand the difference between an ideas business and a scalable business model. So 2 years ago, I completely changed as a leader. I changed my management style. I changed everything. I changed even the leadership team around me to become a company that can really scale. So in innovation and entrepreneurship, there's the idea phase. It's very easy. There's the turning an idea into value proposition and business model phase. That requires some experience. And then once you have a proven idea, you actually need to stop with the ideas and you need to scale. That's a completely different skill set. So that's what, Silicon Valley has been pretty good at. There's a lot of things you can love and hate about Silicon Valley, but there's an incredible talent pool of people who know how to scale businesses. That is something that is very rare in many places around the world, like in my country in Switzerland. I think we have good entrepreneurship, not so much good, experience in scaling. And in large established companies, there is no scaling experience. Most companies are not good at scaling new ideas. They're world-class at killing ideas, which is good at the beginning, but once, you actually need to invest in some of them. So a lot to learn by talking to other entrepreneurs and innovators. Share your failures, because if we all learn from each other's failures, we're going to grow a lot faster. Be proud of the things that don't work. Don't just be proud of your successes. Be proud of the failures. It's a badge of honor if you weren't criminal, you did a failure with good faith. You were, not experienced enough, the technology doesn't work. That's fine. Be proud of it and share. Share it with pride, and you'll grow and you'll have the right people around you and you'll learn a ton.
Okay, thank you. In our audience, some students are working for large organizations and others are thinking about launching their own startups shortly. And so people think that large organizations usually have sufficient resources and money and people, but new startups kind of suffering from the lack of resources. So they have to kind of find this potential investors to receive money. So if there is a fundamental difference between new startups and large organizations with respect to leading breakthrough innovation, and what would you advise them differently?
So I would actually push back strongly on that point. Let me bring up this graph from CB Insights. This is the funding that startups have. Global funding to startups has risen to unbelievable, levels. And I'm saying global funding. So this is not just, the United States. This is global funding. Everywhere around the world, startups, there's tons of capital. I'm not saying it's easy to raise capital, but you know what? It's easier to get money from venture capitalists than getting money inside your corporation from the corporate. Because there's something you need to understand. Research and development is not innovation. It's not the same thing. Today, and again, I work with pharmaceutical companies, so I'll use that as an example. They have enormous research and development budgets. To do what? To find new molecules, to find new drugs. But their problem is not to find new drugs. Their problem is to find a business model to bring those things to the market. So there's a big challenge. One challenge is pricing and access. So in the pharma world, today, the companies are finding one injection cures. You make one injection, you're cured for your life. So diseases where over 10, 20 years, from the moment you were diagnosed to your death, you had to take the medication. So pharmaceutical companies could earn money for 20 years by literally keeping the person alive. And now they come up with this one cure injection. They have an ethical dilemma, which is, if I bring this cure to market, what am I going to do? Because Now 20 years of revenues have to turn into one injection. And if they start to ask for, $5 million for one injection, what's going to happen? They're going to have a PR crisis because the world is going to say, you horrible pharmaceutical companies. So they have a moral dilemma. If they bring it to the market, they're killing their business model. If they don't bring it to the market, they're not helping people live a better life. So what do they have to do? They have to do what I call business R&D. And startups, they do business R&D every single day. Means finding out value propositions that customers care about and business models that can work. Today, in most, I'm not saying all, but in most established companies, there is very little money for business R&D. Huge R&D budgets, huge technology budgets. That's feasibility. Can I build this thing? Very little available resources specifically for business R&D. So I've been, talking to a bank last month, 50,000 employees, and they have a hard time mobilizing $30 million. A company with 50,000 employees, they can't mobilize $30 million to invest in breakthrough innovation. $30 million is what, some companies now do as a Series A or B round. So startups are better funded. So forget that myth that innovation teams in corporations are better funded. They are not, period. In 95% of companies. So what does that mean? If you want to do breakthrough innovation, not technology innovation, different thing. But if you want to build great new things that are going to change the world, it's probably not just technology. You probably want to work for startups and learn from startups. Yes, it's not as secure. There's no job security in the startup world. That's never going to happen. And of course, it's very hard. You might have to take a pay cut. You earn less. So when people come and work in our company, they're going to earn less than in big corporate careers. So we have a lot of corporate people who switch to us. We're not a startup anymore. We're a young company, but they're not going to get the same salaries. But what they get is the excitement of changing the world. What they get is the possibility to learn, how is this done today? So we have a lot of corporate innovators who are coming to us because in corporations, they can't actually do what they want to do. It's changing. So there's hope. Large companies who we're working with, they are instilling this culture, but it's still very hard. So my advice to those of you who really want to learn how innovation works today, outside of the scientific part, outside of the engineering part, and that's not where the big changes are going to happen. Look, Tesla did some scientific innovations around batteries and so, but what they really did is they built a business model that succeeded, while every single car company on the planet failed and is still failing. Think of it. Just compare Tesla and filthy rich car companies. They are all incapable of doing what Tesla did. And there's a lot of things I hate about Tesla. I love their cars, but there are a lot of things I hate about the company culture. But they are world-class business model innovators around technology. So very long answer, get very excited, because you need, when you make a career choice and you want to do innovation, today, you're probably going to learn faster and more in the startup world. And that's where I would go. I know a lot of people who stay in the corporate world. What do? They change from one company to one that they think is more innovative. They're going to see exactly the same thing, and then they go to the startup world. So you have to be very careful. And last advice, if you want to know if a company has any chance to do innovation, you just need to look at one indicator. One indicator. How much time does the CEO personally spend on innovation? And if you see that, there is a chance that innovation will happen. The examples I mentioned, Amazon, Jeff Bezos is not CEO anymore. He spent a ton of time on innovation. Ping An, they have a CEO, a co-CEO is 100% focused on innovation. Logitech, the Swiss company that you might know from the computer mice, the CEO, Bracken Darrell, he says, I spend 40 to 60% of my time on innovation. If you want to stay in the corporate world, go and do your homework and check if the CEO is personally spending time on innovation. If the CEO is not doing that, the company will not do the kind of innovation we need in the 21st century. Sorry for getting so excited, but this is fun stuff.
It's great. It's a great answer for students. I think one more last question. Okay, so recently we have so many new technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and whatnot. And so you actually highlight that we need to build a new business model around those technologies. So we are facing right now the state-of-the-art technologies. And what would be the most promising business model in the future? Oops.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So I think there's this myth that technology, innovation equals technology. So technology can be a driver, but it doesn't have to be. So before we get focused on technology, let me emphasize that, we do that in the Invincible Company. Oops, over here. So we show companies that innovated with inferior technology. Nintendo Wii, it was off-the-shelf technology, inferior to their competitors, and they disrupted the entire field. So don't get too focused on technologies. Now, technology is a driver, and it is an exciting thing. But success and failure often depend on the business model, not the technology. So let me give you an example. And there's no right business model. There is the best business model for your challenge at a specific moment. There's no magic formula. Let me give you an old example because I love it, because without the right business model, this technology would have never existed or taken off. So in the 70s, you might remember Xerox, right? A company not doing so well these days, but they invented the modern day photocopying machine, long time ago. And that photocopying machine, and I learned a lot of this from Henry Chesbrough, and somebody who I really admire. He explains his story where this machine was very sophisticated and could make 2,000 photocopies a day, right? Today we don't need photocopies anymore, but it used to be, new. Nobody knew what it means to make 2,000 photocopies because the process of copying documents was chemical, it was smelly. So nobody ever experienced this technology. And the machine was extremely expensive. So nobody could buy it. So they had a problem. Nobody knew what this was about. Nobody really cared. And it was expensive. So they couldn't sell it. So they had to ask, what could we do to bring this technology to the market? So they did two things. First thing is, to bring it to the market, they said, we're going to not sell the machine. We're going to allow people to lease the machine for a monthly fee. So they would get it into the market. Well, but people don't know how to use this. So in New York, in public spaces, they made demonstrations about this machine so people could experience it, what this was about. So they brought the machine into companies, but then they changed the revenue model. They said, the leasing is not enough. What we're going to do is we're going to give people with the leasing 2,000 photocopies for free per month. But for every additional copy, you're going to pay money. People would say, oh, that's great because we're never going to make more than 40 copies a day. So every month, we're just going to pay the leasing fee and, that's great. It turns out, once these machines were in the offices, people would make 2,000 photocopies a day So from day 2 onwards, Xerox would earn a little bit of money, just a tiny little bit of money from every single photocopy made, a fraction of a cent. And it turns out that became one of the most lucrative business models at the time. Xerox became, back then, filthy rich from fractions of cents on every single photocopy made. That technology was amazing and it was new, but it would have never seen the light of day if they hadn't invented the right business model. So is that the perfect business model? No, it was the right business model for that technology to bring it to the market and make money. So there is no right business model. So that's where we go back to, yes, you need to be creative. You need to come up with the right business model for your challenge that could work. And that's where, and that's why, you know, we put this stuff, the business model pattern library, into our book because we see people are not good at business models. People are amazing at technology, and they're really bad at business models. The opportunity in the 21st century is building business models around technologies, because some technologies will not see the light of day. I'll give you one experience. I work with a company called SCA. They make hygiene products like bathroom installations for big buildings. It's one of the biggest hygiene companies on the planet. And they do a lot of technology innovation. And when I gave a presentation there many, many years ago, they said, wow, Alex, what we just learned is for every one of our failed technology products, we're going to look at them again and say, actually, the problem was not the technology. The problem was we used the business model we know of our company, and that's why it didn't work. What if we asked, what could the right business model be to make this technology successful? Because from a technology point of view, it worked. But they couldn't make the business model work because they weren't good enough at understanding technology is a small piece of success. I'd almost say engineers are great, scientists are great. They're always going to figure out, you know, some of the hardest challenges. The problem is technology doesn't matter if you don't embed it in a great value proposition and great business model. So the opportunity is not in the technology per se. Even if you're a scientist, even more, you need to understand business models, because that will help you commercialize some of the science that will never see the light of day if you don't find the right business model. So back to the pharmaceutical companies, they have a huge challenge. If they want to bring these great innovations to the market without killing their business model, they need to come up with the right new business model. Kodak didn't do it. Fujifilm did. Kodak actually invented digital cameras and committed innovation suicide because digital cameras would kill their business model of analog film. So that's what I call innovation suicide. You bring a technology to the market that is killing you because it's killing your business model. That's exactly what Kodak did. Innovation suicide. Because they were really good at technology innovation, they killed themselves. That's what happened. Fujifilm, on the other hand, they were number 2. They brought up new business models. That's why they survived, and they're still alive, contrary to Kodak.
Thank you. I think Alex is pointing out the fundamental difference between innovation and technological invention. Okay, so time is up now. If you have more questions, you can simply buy his book, The Invincible Company. Okay, so thank you, Alex, for taking your time to share your insights and experiences and personal experiences with us today. And what you shared today will surely help our students to advance their career and make their invincible innovative startups in Korea. I also thank all participants for joining today's forum. I hope you learned a lot of valuable lessons from Alex today. And thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.